Is the United States of America on the brink of collapse? It's a question that's asked often in our pessimistic age. There is a theory that can help us with an answer, and to find it, we need to journey back into history. The architect of this theory was a man called Bagot Glubb, better known as Glubb Pasha. British by birth, he lived most of his life in Iraq and Jordan, where he commanded the Arab Legion. Glubb was an Arab scholar and the author of a number of works. His masterpiece, however, was published in Blackwood's magazine in 1976. It was called The Fate of Empires. Studying history, Glubb developed an overarching theory that every empire, whether it was extant in the last century or died out 2,000 years ago, shared identical characteristics, exhibited the same developmental journey, and lasted for about the same length of time. He broke this lifespan into 6 ages: an age of pioneers, an age of conquests, an age of commerce, an age of affluence, an age of intellect, and finally an age of decadence. Glubb studied a dozen empires from the last 3,000 years and concluded that these 6 ages unfolded over generally the same period of time, around 250 years, approximately 10 generations. His list was as follows: Assyria, with its capital in Nineveh in modern-day Iraq; the Achaemenid Persian dynasty begun by Kurosh the Great; Greece under Alexander and his descendants; the Roman Republic that began in 260 BC, and its successor, the Roman Empire, from 27 BC onwards; the Arab Empire that blossomed 500 years after the fall of Rome; the Mamluk Empire; the Ottomans; the Spanish Empire; Russia under the Romanovs; and Britain from 1700. Now, Glubb admitted his own shortcomings in the paper, stating that his knowledge of China and the Americas was too slight to draw from. But he really need not have been shamed by his ignorance. Almost all of the other significant empires in world history fall into line with this theory. The Tang dynasty ruled China between 618 and 907. The Mughals ruled much of South and Central Asia for 300 years. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe conforms to his macro theory, as does the Empire of the Incas. Aztec reign falls some 3 generations short of Glubb's mean, but they're almost unique in coming face to face with an alien superpower in the shape of the conquistadors and the trailing smallpox virus. I have found one outlier to this theory, the Malian Empire, which is extant from 1235 to 1670, an immense 435 years. This needs more research, and perhaps I can make another video exploring that great civilization sometime in the future. Every empire shows remarkable similarity, and neither technology nor the distance of time seems to have an impact. The Assyrians marched on foot and fought with spears and bows and arrows. The British used artillery, railways and ocean-going ships, yet the 2 empires lasted for approximately the same periods. Nor does the shape of empire make a difference. The territories conquered by Alexander the Great spread south and east by land. The Spanish went to war with none of their neighbors, yet their conquests touched the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. Both empires lasted for almost exactly the same number of years. So what did Glubb mean by his 6 ages? First, there is an age of pioneers, which Glubb also refers to as the outburst. This is a period that sees a small nation, hitherto ignored by its neighbors as insignificant, suddenly breaking free from its territory. The Macedonians under Alexander the Great saw their border expand from the edge of Thessaly to the Indus River in less than 30 years. In 2 generations, Spain went from being under the yoke of the Nasrids to controlling Mexico, Santo Domingo, Peru, and the Philippines. Characteristics on display are courage and energy, in stark contrast to the decaying civilizations they overthrow. After the pioneering age comes the age of conquests, where the nation overtakes huge swathes of territory. At this stage, military campaigns are more organized and disciplined. 2 decades after the death of the Prophet, the Arabs had conquered Persia. 50 years after that, they had overtaken all of the Roman provinces of the Middle East. The home nation at this point is still confident and optimistic. Next comes the age of commerce. Proud military traditions still hold sway, says Glubb, but gradually the desire to make money seems to gain hold of the public. New wealth pours in. For Spain, this was silver from the mines of Bolivia. For Britain, tea from India and sugar from the Caribbean. At the same time, markets are opened up for export. For the Tang dynasty, fabrics and ceramics flowed along the Silk Route. For the Ottomans, demand for their cotton blossomed in Western Europe. Palaces and municipal buildings are constructed, as are great roads, bridges, railways, and other forms of communication. Glubb still sees this age as a positive extension of the age of conquest, with its emphasis on exploration and hunger for new enterprise. Ominously, Glubb posits that money is the root of evil for empires. During what he calls the Age of Affluence, money eclipses honor and adventure, shifting focus from the community to the individual. The 11th century philosopher Al-Ghazali said, "Students no longer attend college to acquire learning, but to obtain those qualifications that will enable them to grow rich." Slowly and imperceptibly, the Age of Affluence silences the notion of duty. The civilization turns its back on military readiness, convincing itself aggression is somehow base, and society must rise above the immorality of warfare. Now comes the Age of Intellect. The mercantile class seeks reflected glory by patronizing schools, museums, and artists. It was during this stage Alexander II of Russia embarked on his university building program. Harun al-Rashid constructed the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Knowledge in Baghdad, while Artaxerxes II rebuilt palaces and dedicated temples throughout Persia. Surely we should welcome this, you say? Well, Glubb does see positives, but he also notes this veneration of intellect undermines the notion of patriotism and will not be enough to save civilization. Cold intellectualism slowly overcomes emotional self-sacrifice. The head, as it were, is elevated over the heart, which naturally leads to the final stage, an age of decadence. This is the beginning of the end for empires, an accelerated decline that is not physical, but rather a moral and spiritual breakdown. The preceding period of wealth has left society soft, and this moral weakness manifests itself in a number of different ways. Civil dissension, wherein factions fight each other in the street and harangue their opponents in public debating chambers. Glubb makes great efforts to explain that he does not view foreigners as inferior to the original inhabitants, merely different. He notes that during the final years of empire, the main cities, Istanbul in the 16th century, Baghdad in the 11th, Rome in its final 50 years, were host to large numbers of immigrants, often majorities, who form communities of their own and even after generations harbour ancient grievances that will manifest as decline sets in. Ancient Rome was famous for the celebrity it bestowed on its gladiators, but this was also the case with polo players under both the Mamluks and the Mughals. In 10th century Baghdad, pop singers were idolized, and in the waning years of both the Ottoman and Persian empires, chefs were accorded celebrity status. You may well look around you at societies in the West and see this decadence play out uncannily today. Indeed, Glubb wrote this paper in 1976 and relates his astonishment at reading of the last days of Baghdad's pomp and thinking it eerily close to the recessionary and ransacked United Kingdom he called home at the time. Where then is the United States in the cycle of empires? The country was founded in 1776, but it was not a hegemony from birth. Glubb's paper, after all, was not called The Fate of Countries. So when did the US become a superpower with imperial aspects? Well, if I was forced to name a date, I'd choose the Mexican-American War of 1848. That was 160 years ago. And while it does look, from some angles, like the United States is fully embracing an age of decadence, by Glubb's formula, the American superpower still has at least another 3 or 4 generations left. And what of the future? Are there nascent empires in the making? Do they have what it takes to grow through the 6 stages? The European Union is continually expanding. It has its own currency, president, and anthem, and has even begun managing military actions abroad, but hegemony seems unlikely. Youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, the union is fraying at the edges, and its top-heavy bureaucracy makes problem-solving difficult. What would we call this phase of China's journey? The Deng dynasty, perhaps? The last 30 years have seen astonishing growth. China is using that wealth to build up its military, construct the Belt and Road Initiative, and make inroads throughout Africa and South America. With its unified populace and an impressive record of long-term planning, this looks a more likely bet. The Gulf states of the GCC might also be a good contender. The ambitions of Project Neom, the diplomatic soft power projections of the UAE and Qatar, and Saudi Arabia's purchase of vast swathes of farming land in East Africa also signal imperial ambitions. Perhaps these contenders will conform to the pattern, or maybe a country none of us had ever considered will burst upon the world and embark on an age of pioneers and conquests. But they will need to remember, however successful they are and whatever political system they favour, they will last for 10 generations and not much more. After all, if Glubb Pasha has told us one thing, it is this: every empire falls. If you enjoyed this story, why not subscribe to the channel? I'll be posting regularly to both my politics and ideas playlists.